In the first segments of Elk Talk, our goal was to teach you and hopefully guide you through the process of what it takes to draw a tag. Whether it was a limited entry tag in one of the states, or as we talked about in the previous episode of leftover tags, general tags, and over-the-counter tags. Now we're going to get into the most difficult part of elk hunting. How to find elk on public land. And we're not just talking about how to find any elk, we're talking about how to find mature bull elk on heavily pressured ground. And that's a completely different story than trying to find elk on private land or trying to find cow elk or young bulls. We are looking for mature bulls on public land. And I would hold that once you find a bull elk, getting a shot at him is probably easier than it is with a lot of other species. The reason most people struggle or fail in punching their elk tag every fall is because they've really not thought about how do I find these elk. Once you find them, killing them is the easier part. The system I use is really simple. I break it down into 5 calendar periods. In the 5 I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about them in a separate episode going forward, is the early season, pre-rut, peak rut, post-rut, and late season. And some of you are probably saying, well, what difference does that make? Well, the priority of the needs elk have in each of those seasons changes. And if you're looking on our calendar, the early season is pretty much any August season, and those are mostly going to be archery seasons. And then you have what I call pre-rut, which is the first 10 to 12 days in September. And then you have peak rut, which to me is mid-September to about the end of the first week of October. Then you have post-rut, which to me is probably the last 3 weeks of October. And then you have what I call late season, which is anything November, December, or later. So in these future episodes, we're going to talk about each of those 5 calendar periods. We're also going to talk about the 4 basic needs that elk have. And again, this sounds really simple, but you have to think about what these basic needs are. Because until you understand those basic needs, you're really not going to know which of those needs are the primary need in these 5 calendar periods. So it's obvious that food, water, those are basic needs for any animal. And we all know about that. But we're going to talk about those in a little more depth. The third need is security, survival, or sanctuary, the 3 S's as I call them. And what that means is a bull elk on public land wants to stay alive another year. And post-rut and late season, sanctuary, security, and survival are what, it overrides every other need. And then they have, the 4th need is a seasonal need. It's breeding. It's, affects your hunting during the pre-rut, the peak rut, and a bit during the post-rut. So you have to think about what is the need for the season my tag has me hunting. And not just all 4 needs, but what is the primary need? And once you think about what the primary need or the 2 primary needs are, that's going to tell you where you will find elk in that season. So for the next 5 or 6 episodes, we're going to talk about what this system is and how you apply that system to your hunting. Because we can talk about desk scouting and all the map systems and Google Earth and call-in biologists and everything else. But until you've really thought through the process of, okay, I've got a pre-rut tag in this state, what are the needs of the elk during that period? You need to know that as your absolute basic first step so that when you start looking at maps, when you start calling biologists, you can be educated about at least a general area of what the elk are looking for. So let's talk about food, water, security, and breeding. Some of them are pretty easy. I mean, water, water's water. And there are some huge differences as far as where the need of water is based on whether you're hunting Arizona and New Mexico, or maybe you're hunting northern Idaho and Montana. Food varies heavily, and elk are selective grazers. They are not like deer where they prefer browse. They prefer grasses and forbs. And if there's one thing that I think a lot of hunters overlook during periods when food is a primary factor, is we look at the mountain, we look at the landscape, and we think it's all equal. No. Elk have to go and be selective and find the highest quality food they can in that window of time. So they're not just gonna randomly graze anywhere. They're gonna go and find the places that have the highest nutrient value, the most succulent forbs, the greatest opportunity to accumulate the best nutritional intake over the shortest period of time by expending the least amount of energy. Let's talk about security and sanctuary. And what I'm talking about here are places that bull elk know that they can survive a hunting season. These are places that they and maybe a small bachelor group of bulls goes to year after year after year. And it's a place that is going to give them great escape routes, and the attack routes for hunters are going to be hard, either because of noise, because of us being visible, because of wind directions. They have figured out the places that are going to let them get away from hunters time after time. The last need that we talk about, so we've talked about water, we've talked about food, we've talked about sanctuary. The last one is breeding. And that's the easy one. It's seasonal. Elk are very vocal during the rut. It's, you know, if there's an easy time to find elk on public land, it's during the rut. That's why most places, the only time you get to hunt them during the rut is with a bow, because it's most likely going to lower your probability of actually killing that elk, even if you find them. So now that we've talked about the 5 calendar periods, we've talked about the 4 needs, we're now going to start going into each of these 5 calendar periods in the next videos. There's a reason for the rule that says 90% of the elk are killed by 10% of the hunters. 10% of the hunters have went through the mental process of what I've just talked about. They look at when is their tag, what is the need during that period, where are the elk going to go to satisfy that need. I know that sounds really simple, but that's how you hang your tag on a bull elk on public land.